We've been looking at the patriarchs, at least partly. We talked about Abraham, and then 2 weeks ago we focused in on Isaac specifically and told the story of Isaac getting his wife. And then last week we looked at a story from Jacob's life, specifically where he managed to secure his brother's birthright. And we talked about the fact that the birthright gave special privilege and special benefits to the eldest, and Jacob managed to, was actually the second born and managed to get those. Today we're going to look at another story from Jacob's life. Esau had a blessing, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and then Jacob's flight to another country to get away. So that's our topic for today. And I'll just tell you that as of today, as of right now, I'm still undecided. Next week we will either continue with some of these Genesis stories or we'll move into a couple of my district assembly inspired messages. Or maybe I'll go ahead and finish up some Genesis stuff and then come back to the district assembly inspired messages. So still undetermined on that, but that's kind of where we're headed in terms of our preaching plan. So as a reminder, Jacob bought Esau's birthright by exploiting Esau in a time of weakness. So Esau comes back from out hunting and out in the field, and he's tired, he's exhausted, and he's famished. And probably he really wasn't, but you know how people get. When it's time for lunch today, we'll all be famished, even though we'd probably survive if we missed lunch today. But kind of, and Jacob, he says, "Give me some of that stew." And Jacob says, "Well, I will if you sell me your birthright." "What's a birthright mean to me? I'm starving to death. Give me that stew." And so in that weakness moment, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, so Jacob kind of took it. But besides the birthright, in that time and place, there was also a blessing that was very important, and it was taken very seriously. When the time for the elder patriarch of the family, the oldest person, when he was realizing that his days were numbered and it was about time for him to leave, he would gather the kids and give them each a blessing. And he would carefully plan this out, and the blessing would include what we would kind of consider some prophetic issues. And he would kind of proclaim that, you're going to be a great leader and this is going to happen. And so at least Esau still had the blessing left. He lost the birthright, but he was still going to get his dad's special blessing, which was going to set him up on a good path for the rest of his life. Which brings us to where I want to read today, at least to get started. Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 to 5. Using one of our worship Bibles, page 21. This is early on in the Bible. Genesis 27, 1 to 5. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And I want to stop there, and rather than read a lot of what comes next. I just kind of want to tell you the story or fill you in on what happened next. Rebecca, of course, we had shared a couple of weeks ago that one of the things that Isaac and Rebecca were known for was favoring one child or the other. Isaac really favored Esau and liked him, and he was his kind of guy, and Rebecca favored Jacob and preferred him and liked him better and all of that, and so they're kind of faulted for being the kind of parents that showed favoritism, but they did. So Rebecca, having overheard this and realizes that Esau is about to get the family blessing from her husband, she decides to take action. And so she began by plotting to cook the kind of meal that Esau was supposed to cook. She was going to get some stuff and make it up the way Isaac liked it. And then she was going to have Jacob take it to Isaac, pretending to be Esau. And so that was her plan. So, and to make the plan work, because they were such different personality types, she took Esau's clothes and put them on Jacob. She even put goat skin on Jacob's hands and neck, because she knew that Esau was kind of like a big, burly, beardy, hairy guy, and Jacob was more of a petite, smooth skin. I had a teacher once who said that, Jacob, what the Bible tells us, he liked to kind of stay around the tents and cook and do things like that. And so it's Rebecca's idea to go so far as to put him in Esau's clothes. So then when the time comes, he serves the food, and Isaac, the dad, points out that, you've got the voice of my son Jacob, but you're telling me you're Esau. And he literally kind of tricked him and told him to come closer and do this so he could feel his hands and smell his clothes. And of course he was wearing Esau's clothes, and so the smell fooled him. He had the goat skin on the back of his hands and on his neck, and so that fooled him. And he's like, well, you sound like Jacob, but you've got to be Esau. And so Jacob received the blessing that Isaac intended for Esau. And I'm not going to read it to you, but he asked that God would give him heaven's and earth's riches, and that he would be a great nation, and that everybody would bow down to him, and all that stuff that he intended for Esau, and Jacob got it instead. And so what I want you to do is I want you to imagine being Esau. Put yourselves in Esau's shoes for a moment and ask yourself, how would you feel if, back on the day that he sold his birthright, within hours, or at least certainly by the next day, he would have to wake up and think, as he's getting hungry again, what in the world did I do? I sold my birthright for dinner yesterday? Now I'm hungry again? I mean, and now, at least I've got the blessing, and now Jacob didn't, exploit him and take advantage of him and trick him. Jacob literally used deceit and trickery to steal the blessing. So Esau must have been a little angry. Do you think maybe that we can add that to our Hall of Fame of understatements? Let's read Genesis 27:41. Genesis 27:41. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near." In other words, my father's about to die. "Then I will kill my brother Jacob." So he was a little angry. He literally made a plan. Dad's going to die soon. I'm not going to do anything until that happens. But once Dad's dead, there's nothing stopping me. Jacob's a dead man. I'm going to kill my brother. He was that angry. So he was upset and mad and angry. So Rebecca, of course, she must have been one of those nosy mothers that always butting in and hanging around. She also overheard him talking about this. Maybe he talked out loud, he was so mad. But she got wind of Esau's plan. And so, as we would put it today, she told Jacob to get out of Dodge. She goes to her son Jacob and says, you know, Esau's got a bad, but you got to get out of here. You need to run off and hide. But we don't want to upset your father. So we can't just go and tell him that, you know, Esau's going to kill Jacob, so Jacob's got to run away. So she came up with another deceitful plan. So she remembered how important it was when Isaac was going to get a wife, that Abraham sent the servant back to the home country to get a wife for Isaac, and she thought, I can use the same concept. So she runs to Isaac and complains about those Hittite women around here. And if Jacob gets one of those as a wife, that's just the end. Life isn't worth living if that's what Jacob does. So Isaac, thinking it's his idea, y'all see a big fat Greek wedding? The wife is constantly manipulating behind the scenes, and she says, you know, at one point she makes the statement that, well, you know, he's the head of the house, but I'm the neck, and I turn him whatever way I want to. That's kind of what was going on here. So Isaac says, I got an idea. Jacob, come here. I want you to go back to the home country. Get yourself a wife there. And so Isaac thinks it's his idea, and he makes plans, sends Jacob on his way. And so having complained to Isaac about the local women, Isaac gets sent to get himself a wife back in the home country. He's going to go back to Laban's neighborhood. And if you remember our story from like 2 weeks ago, Laban is where Isaac got his wife, Rebekah. So that's the plan. Which brings us to Genesis 28, verses 10 and 11. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. So I want to stop there and just ask the question, how do you think he felt? I asked you earlier to put yourself in Esau's shoes and think about how Esau felt. I want you to think about how Jacob felt at this point right now. Now, by the way, this was a time and a place when travel was not by car. You know, a couple of weeks ago, you know, I went to General Assembly. We drove to Indianapolis and back, you know, and it was a short day's drive to get there. This trip would have taken Jacob days and days and days. It was about 300 miles. He may have had, you know, donkey camel with him, but he probably walked most of the way. So long trip. He gets to the place that night where he needs to stop for the night. The sun had set, and he's tired. So I'm guessing that he felt tired. Is that reasonable? You know, I'm guessing he was discouraged. He realizes that, you know, and I love this part because they don't really comment on it. But have you ever decided you needed to sleep on the floor or something? You start looking around for something to put your head on. We call it a pillow these days. Well, there were no pillows around. There were no couch cushions. But he decided that having his head not flat was better than having it flat. And so he found a stone that he used as a pillow. And if you've slept with your head on a stone, you know, we've got a love seat that's made in such a way that if you put your head on the armrest, kind of use that as a little bit of, it might as well be a stone. It's a little piece of wood with a little thin piece of cloth over it, you know. Not very comfortable, and he's tired, and he knows he's got more days to go. He had to be discouraged. Also, you know, having left town like that. You think maybe he felt guilty? He knows that he just blatantly stole his brother's blessing after having tricked his brother and exploited his brother to take his birthright. By this time, even the most callous person would have to be feeling some guilt. God had to be working on his mind and his emotions about what a horrible person he was and what a terrible thing that he's done and is doing. So that guiltiness had to be there. He must have been fearful. I mean, the reason he's leaving is because he knows that his brother wants to kill him. So he's got to be afraid. And besides that, he's sleeping out in the wilderness where there are known to be wild animals and this, that, and the other. That fear's there, fear of being caught by his brother. That had to be in the mix. And of course, he was alienated from his family. His brother, wants to kill him. His dad would want to punish him if he knew. His dad probably never even knew. But Rebecca, even though she was on his side and rooting for him, he had to leave her. She was going to stay home and he was going to go by himself. And so he's alienated from his family. And then he was also alienated from God. He had to feel that. Like his family were God worshipers. Ever since Abraham, God was the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. And nowadays we say the God of Jacob. But at this point he had to feel like, I'm abandoning my family. I am so guilty. I've done such wrong. God has abandoned. I feel God-forsaken. So we use God-forsaken. We'll talk about a God-forsaken town. We mean a town in the middle of nowhere where nothing good ever happens. But he must have really felt that he was outside of God's will now, and he's outside of God's place and all of that. God-forsaken. Well, let's read the next few verses. We're going to go to verse 12 and read through 22. So he lay his head down on that pillow, verse 11. Verse 12, he had a dream, and when she saw a stairway resting on the earth with the top reaching to heaven, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I may return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So I think the key sentence here, I kept thinking back to what Kim referenced and then I repeated, those 7 words in the Peter story in the New Testament, the most important 7 words. I didn't count them, but I thought these words are so important. He felt God forsaken, but he learned, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. And by the way, I have Yahweh on the screen here. In case you didn't know, If you're using an NIV, they use the pattern. If you're reading along and the word Lord comes up in all capitals, that means that that's being translated from the original Hebrew word for Yahweh. Whereas if the Lord comes up not in all capitals, it's from the Hebrew word for Lord or Master. So when Yahweh is being talked about, it'll show up in the NIV as all capitals, and it is in this case. Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I was not aware of it. That is just so important. So here he was, believing, I think, to be God-forsaken. He believed he was in a place where God wasn't with him. He believed that God had abandoned him because he had kind of run away from God. And he believed that probably that he was going to be cut off from the earlier covenant and that he was no longer part of God's plan. And he just felt really bad about this. And he believed that he was without God. And then he changes his mind and says, surely that God is in this place, and I was unaware. But we call it prevenient grace. In the Church of the Nazarene and some of our sister congregations, we use that term to mean God's grace, like before we get saved. When we're still running from God, when we're still away from God, the things that God does to get us back, the things that God does to initiate a relationship with us, all of those things that God does, and so we call it prevenient grace, the grace that comes before, is the way to describe it. And so that's what this is an example of. And so God comes to him in his low moment, tired, discouraged, alienated from his family and thinking he's alienated from God, which to some extent he was, but not forsaken by God. And God comes with a message to him. And I want to cover just kind of the highlights of the message. First, he made it clear who he was. This voice you're hearing, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. Let's not misunderstand. I'm not the God of this forest or the God of this stone. And there are people that they lived around had all kinds of weird beliefs about who God was and how many gods there were and all of that. So he let Jacob know, I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac. I'm Yahweh. He renewed the covenant. He had promised Abraham, and he had renewed it with that. And so it was kind of like a family thing. God is going to use us, and we're going to be a great nation. And Jacob must have been thinking, looks like Esau is going to be the father of the great nation. Because even though I got the blessing and the birthright, I'm leaving town, and I've crossed a line, and I've done too much. And God said, no, I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. And through your descendants, there's going to be that. And then he told them that through your descendants, you're going to be a blessing to all people. And so not only are you going to be blessed, you're going to be a blessing. Now I think that that's the superior benefit. I've told you before, because it sticks with me, you watch these home makeover shows, and there's two kinds of people. Those who get done watching it and think, man, I wish someone would do that for me. And there's the kind of person that says, man, I wish I could do that for someone. Wouldn't it be great to be that guy who says, move that bus, look at what we've done for you. And others are like, man, I wish I'd fix up my house. And not there's anything wrong with that. I wish my house were fixed up. But they get to be a blessing to everyone. Talk about having an important role. We all want meaning in our life. There's ultimate meaning if you're going to be a blessing for God. And then he promised his continued presence. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to be with you until this is done. Don't worry about me. You might have felt God forsaken, but you're not God forsaken. God doesn't forsake you. So the question for us today, 700 years later, whatever it is, do you or have you ever felt God forsaken? Have you ever kind of wondered if God had abandoned you? And I think we could almost use that same list. situation comes up and you're tired and discouraged, maybe you're guilty of something, maybe you think back to when you were before Christ, still a lost sinner, fearful of the consequences that might be coming, alienated from who knows who, people that you've been irresponsible with and didn't treat right, and et cetera, et cetera. All of those things can make you feel God forsaken. God is not in my life. I still remember clearly some relatives of a member of my church who were I knew who they were, and I had been at family gatherings and this, that, and the other, but they came into church one day, and I know they were joking, but they literally came in the church, got about 10 feet in, they stopped, and looked around, and said, well, it didn't cave in. I thought if I walked in the church, it would cave in on me. They said that with wonder, that God didn't zap them for coming into his holy church, God doesn't forsake people. So I think that the message that Isaac got, that we get similar message. One, God is still with you. He is still, he's been nicknamed respectfully the Hound of Heaven. He's after you. He's chasing you. Think about that. We think that God is so mad at us, that he hates us for what we've done, and we've rebelled against him, and it turns out that he's chasing you. Think about that. He's still after you. That prevenient grace is still there. He has not forsaken you. He's still trying. He's making the first step and the second step. He's after you. And his offer still stands. Some people think, I've heard in my life, that if you ask forgiveness, he'll forgive you and you get eternal life in heaven. But not for me. I've gone too far. That might work for some people, but not me. If the worst thing a person's ever done was stolen a candy bar when they were 7, I understand that, but not for what I've done. The people I've hurt, the way I've blasphemed God and treated him, and there's just no way. But his offer does still stand. If anyone confesses their sin, God is just and will forgive their sins and cleanse them from all unrighteousness. That's in the Bible. Remains true. He can still make you a blessing. You think you've thrown away your life? During that same video that the general superintendent showed us, in which the Papua New Guineans were dancing around and everything, a couple minutes later in that same video, he showed us a scene where he was ordaining a 92-year-old woman. Think about that. He said now she's 94 and she's still ministering and doing the Lord's work. So if anyone here thinks they're too old, you're not. God can still make you a blessing. Fascinating. And he will be with you always. That's a promise that came up more than once. And one of our speakers was also very short and said that he always appreciated that special verse in the Bible just for you short people, where Jesus said, "Lo, I will be with you always." We had fun at Journalist Industries Assembly. But he will. He's not going to forsake you and run away. You might do everything you can to get out of his presence. I'm reminded of Adam and Eve in the garden trying to go and hide. Didn't work. God found them and confronted them. It had to be an awkward moment for Adam and Eve. But think about the difference it made in their lives. So that message is for you too. So here's the takeaway. No matter where you are, no matter what you've done, you will find, surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware of it. He's there, and he's going to stay there, and he's going to be with you no matter what you've done, no matter how far away you think you are, no matter where you think you It's like, well, God can't be here. Well, yes, He can. He can be there. One of our pastors, in a brief impromptu report, spur of the moment, dirty trick by the district superintendent, said that his wife has a new ministry, said that his shy, introverted wife goes with some regularity to the local strip club and befriends and talks to strippers and tries to be an influence in their lives and get to know them and help them. And it's uncomfortable for her, but she does it anyway. Guess who else is there? God. He's there too. And that's the way it can be wherever you go, whatever you do, whether you're doing it for Him or running away from Him, He's going to be there, and He's after you. Let's pray.